Hi,
Okay.
all right, thank you.
Um, wait a minute. What do you see on the screen? Do you see a Word document or do you see?
Word.
Okay, hold on. Let me try again. Okay. There.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Melinda.
Sure.
All right, is there any public comment before we get started? All right. Hearing none, let's go on to the minutes.
There was a lot on SWHA. I'll move approval of the minutes from July 21st.
Thank you, Reed. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Terry. Is there any further discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, the minutes have been approved. All right, it's a little early to start on the mixed use development pre-application unless everyone's here.
We also have minutes from August 4th.
Oh, that's
Laura.
right. Yep.
And I'm sure we have some other items that we can add to this.
Yeah,
collectively.
yeah, let's do that. At 8 o'clock, we have the Mud Pond Conservation Area recap of site visit, but why don't we do that now?
Yeah, and so I wanted to share that as the group moved off to begin the walk, the neighbors, and unfortunately I didn't have anything to jot down their names. The neighbors directly across from the entrance to the parking were unable to go on the walk, but they did just want to share that they were interested in the conservation area and that there were some ideas about additional parking locations, and I encouraged them to share proposed parking solutions with Melinda.
I may make a suggestion if you don't mind, and that's because both Andy and Chris are here. So I'm thinking if we want to have a longer discussion about mud pond, including, additions to these minutes, maybe we should put that off until after the discussion about the proposed development.
All right, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Okay, so let's, there really are no minutes to approve since it was a site walk. So we could do the recap at 8 as planned.
Okay.
All right,
Andy or Chris, do you want to share screens, or do you want me to share the screen for you?
I'm prepared to share my screen, Melinda.
Okay, let me just enable that. Okay, there you go.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. And just so everybody knows who I am, I'm Chris Snyder with Snyder Homes and Snyder Williston Properties. And we are here presenting our preliminary, or I guess it's pre-application layout for the Essex Alliance Church property in Williston. And I just got to stop sharing and find my notes here for 1 second. And all right, here we go. Get the right one up. All right, are you seeing our intro page there?
yes.
Perfect, great. So this is a property that was previously approved both at the town and also at the state for development. And the Essex Alliance Church has decided not to proceed with the development of the property. And so we have been working really over the last several months designing a proposed neighborhood. And what we are doing is proposing, I think we have 6 different home types that are proposed within the neighborhood. And that we have found that having varied housing types within a certain neighborhood is very beneficial for for everyone associated with the neighborhood. So I'm going to do a quick little review. We have worked with a land planner quite extensively to develop this and utilize a lot of the existing information that we had from the Essex Alliance Church application, but also utilizing some new information that we've brought to the table. So here's our property. So there's a connection to the property. There's connections to all of the existing neighborhoods. This proposed parcel is within the growth center and is probably the largest undeveloped parcel within the growth center. And so you're going to, because of that, there's already a lot of connections around the property and access and components to it. So that is one of the things that we were focused on when we were developing this plan. Unexpected, well, we have some large unexpected things that are going on within the neighborhood, i.e. there are some parks, there's some layouts, and just some differences that you're going to see that we haven't seen before necessarily in any of our neighborhoods. Playful, some opportunities to play and do different things and connect. We have community, so there's a lot of different home types and housing scenarios that we're going to be allowing for within the neighborhood. So it does allow for community and some connection to the community, both internal and also with the town of Williston. One of the things that we focus on as a company is that we do construct homes. We don't construct houses. We don't construct units. We sometimes interchange those, but the reality is we are creating homes for people. And that's what our goal is as a company, is to build homes for people who want to live within Williston. So there's a whole description and some language associated and helped us create some of the layout and some of the plans in here. And so I'll let you all read that as you go through sort of our presentation later. I think it's important to note sort of where this is located within the within Williston, and you'll see that this property is adjacent to Route 2A and is adjacent to Finney Crossing, the Hamlet, and then there's some commercial buildings along Route 2A as well. So it is a piece that is already has relatively high dense development around it. And we are just proposing to meet the planning goals that the town established by setting the bar as a growth center. This is one thing that's we thought was really a great piece and important information is walkability and connection. And you'll notice that there's green dots along this portion of the property, and we're proposing to complete the bike path, which is from the north, from basically Meadow Run. It stops just after it crosses the Allen Brook and dead ends. And so the idea here as a component to the proposed neighborhood is that we would extend that and connect it all the way over to Finney Crossing on the western portion of Finney Crossing. So I think that's a really important piece. But with that, you can also walk, look into all the areas that you can walk to within the town Williston within 10 minutes of this property. And so we wanted to sort of highlight the walkability and the context of this neighborhood with the surrounding portions. Site environmental constraints, obviously this Conservation Commission, there are meadow wetlands associated with the property. They are not connected to the Allen Brook. They are completely disconnected. It is a meadow, but there is upland in the center of the portion of the property. And you're going to see that we have touched or impacted some of the buffer and also some of the wetland. We're obviously working through some of these designs. It is pre-application, and we are looking to get some information and some feedback from both the HAC along with your group and the DRB about some of the overall layouts. This is what I'd consider the graphic representation of our proposed neighborhood. And just so everybody knows, there will be 3 access points The primary access point will be along Alpine Drive. There'll be a secondary access along Beaudry Lane, and then also off of Chelsea Place and Dunmore. There's already a turnoff located there in preparation for a future connection. So we do have 3 connections into the neighborhood. You're going to note that we our streets have a bit of a what I call a movement to them. They are not perfectly straight streets. There's a little bit of a bend. There's bends here all throughout the neighborhood, and that is done on purpose. One of the things that we were focused on was showing how our streets did not need to be perfectly straight. We think it creates a neighborhood. We think it helps define some different areas, and also, to be honest, slows internal traffic down. Internal traffic is actually where we get our most complaints in neighborhoods. It's not through traffic, it's internal traffic. And it's the neighbor going too fast through the neighborhood. It's the person right next door. And so by having some of these shifts and also some proposed on-street parking, we're trying to slow some of the traffic down through the neighborhood. In terms of bike path, the bike path is going to be running along this proposed route, and then you would come, I believe it's this way, and then back down through here, and then over to the Finney Crossing. So that is an important component for this proposed neighborhood. Now, throughout the neighborhood, we're also going to be having sidewalks and access. So not only do the people get to use the bike path, but also get to use sidewalks and connect over to bike paths or connect over to the different areas within the Task Corners zoning district. The park and the layout area is primarily focused within the upland area of the wetland components on the property. There are, as I mentioned, 6 different home types. We do have apartments located in the southwestern corner, and then we do have 2-unit townhomes along Chelsea Place, and then we have carriage homes that back up to Half Moon Lane, and then they also do go around the edges, and we create a little carriage home neighborhood, and then we have townhome components and blocked off into sections. And then we also do have a proposed 65-unit senior building, apartment building located in the northwest corner. There are all of these different types of homes have different sizes, different designs, and allows for a varied homeowner or apartment dwelling situations. So that's kind of the overall layout in the sketch plan associated with the property. I'm just trying to make sure I covered everything. Plan highlights in this presentation. There's also some more description of the different parts and pieces. I think there is one thing that I forgot, a couple of areas that I forgot about, what they're calling, or what we're calling a townhome U. So what these are rear-loaded townhomes, and there is a green space in between the townhomes. And then in this area, we do have some green space and existing tree outcropping that is on the property. And that tree outcropping we're trying to save, and a portion of it and utilize as some natural barriers between some of the back of the homes and some of the adjacent parcel. This is a little bit more detail of the townhome mews and the area that's between, and this area, down the center can either be open space, bioswales, small rain garden, and we are going to have rain gardens, or areas or green spaces throughout the neighborhood. This is a preliminary idea of some of the front-loaded townhomes. These are actually 4-story. They're 3-story living spaces, but then on the 4th floor is a roof deck. Currently not allowed within zoning, but we're working to figure out how we could potentially have some sort of roof decks in some scenarios. This is rear-loaded townhomes, and so you can see that these are focused, and the entry points are focused off of the street, and that the garages are in the rear. And there's quite a few of these rear-loaded townhomes on the proposed neighborhood. Boardwalk trails, we're going to have lots of trails. We may have some raised trails. We may have some paths. Sort of depends upon how we end up having the layout of the overall property, and how we utilize the park in the upland areas. We're assuming a playground and a tot lot and some other community garden space within the park area. Transportation hierarchy, just so people understand, we are going to have a public road. We're proposing to have public roads, so Beaudry Lane and Alpine Drive. And I guess I would assume it's Beaudry Lane is then going to connect into Chelsea Place. We will have some private road here, and then a minor public road with a multi-use path. That's the bike path, would be located in this southern portion of the property.
Can I ask a question, Chris?
Yes.
That minor public road with multi-use paths, is that like an extra wide road with a portion marked as multi-use path, or is that a divided between the path and the road?
Divided between the path and the road.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. While we're here, one thing I think I do want to point out, and I forgot to mention earlier, is, we have these apartment buildings adjacent to commercial spaces. So that's commercial, that's office buildings, more commercial. There's a Stove and Flag Works is located here. Vermont State Employees Credit Union is located here. And then along, one of the things that I pushed very hard for and want to make sure that people realize is, hey, we have 2 and 3 unit townhomes on Chelsea. And then we have single carriage homes, which are basically 1-story houses along Half Moon Lane. And you're going to notice that we mimic what is directly behind those homes, in that we have 2-story townhomes and carriage homes abutting the adjacent homeowners. And we feel that that's an important component and should, be acknowledged that, hey, we're not trying to put a big apartment building directly adjacent to a 2-unit building. So those were existing homes, and we needed to focus our attention on that. We have a road sections. These are public road, private road, some minor public. Here's the minor public road with multi-use path, and you can see how the bike path is separate. And here's the sidewalk over here. So this would be sidewalk, this is bike path, and this is the section of road.
Can you just leave that up for 1 minute,
Yes.
Chris? Thank you. I'm just looking at the widths of those sections. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's a 10-foot multi-use path, 5-foot sidewalk, and 28-foot travel lane.
It looks like 11 feet between those pedestrian and
Yep.
the road. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's really our presentation for today, and here to, answer any questions. Before we do, Andy, is there anything else that, that you think that we ought to discuss?
Well, I think that was a really good overview to start.
Does anybody have any questions for Chris or Andy?
Yeah, I got a couple. On the first part of Beaudry Lane where you show front townhouses and a couple of duplexes. Currently in that area, there are houses. What happens to those houses that are already exist and are occupied at present?
There is one existing home in that location, and that would be removed. The church currently owns it and rents it out to one of their pastors, and they are planning that is planned. They would have opportunity to move into one of the units here, but there is only a home that is going to be impacted.
Well, there's more than one home there. There's one home that there's a White House that's the one that's, are you referring to the White House that's furthest to the east?
Yeah, that's the one that's on the property that's owned by the church.
I see. So the ones that come out are, okay, so the ones that are further west are not on this property.
That's correct.
Yep.
And those would remain as is, I'm assuming.
Okay, another question. I heard what you said about the similarity of the houses to the adjacent landowners on Chelsea Place and Half Moon Lane. But right now, I took a ride over there yesterday just to see what the property was like. And as I look at that property, if you live on Half Moon Lane and Chelsea Place now, this whole development is going to be right in their backyard. And I was just wondering what your communication has been with those people. Are they aware that this proposal is being made and that there may be development of that closer proximity to them?
Two things. One, the church property was permitted and approved, and so that was going to be located within the property or on the property, and all of those people knew about that previous approval. And there were impacts adjacent to those existing homes. All of the people, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of those people have been notified through an abutters list of this proposed neighborhood. And that has been the primary mode of communication at this point. We have not met with them individually or collectively. As this is a pre-application, we felt that it was, and because of the previous approval of the property being developed, felt that it was a fair approach.
I see. Well, just want to make sure that's not going to come as a big surprise to them. Sounds like it won't.
I mean, they're being identified, they've received notices.
Now, I have one last question. I think I read somewhere in your summary that the wet meadow in the middle there drains into Muddy Brook. Well, that surprised me when I read that. I would have thought it would have drained into Allen Brook, but is that correct? That it drains into Muddy Brook? Or did I misread that?
No, I think that's correct. So we had done some work at Country Crossing probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they were originally mapped as having discharge to Allen Brook. But when you look at their property slopes just a little bit to the south, and the discharge there is off the sort of the southwest corner of the property into the utility line right of way. And then it continues westerly over toward the back of Blair Park, continues further west along Commerce Street, or a little south of Commerce Street, but it eventually ends up in Muddy Brook.
Hmm.
I was surprised as well, given Country Crossing's close proximity to Allen Brook. You would have thought that it
Yeah.
would have drained to the north to Allen Brook, but it does in fact go to Muddy Brook.
Okay, thanks. That's surprised me too.
Thank you, Carl. Anyone else?
Hey, Reed here. I also noticed in the overview that it talked about the decision to not have commercial included in the development, and I just wanted to say that it seemed like a missed opportunity, because if we can go to the slide on walking, the radius for 5-minute and 10-minute walking, it looked to me as though there's a lot of easy walking to other residential areas, but that about half of the services, the businesses, et cetera, in Taft Corners would be outside of the 10-minute walk. Blair Park is great. There's schools, post office, and that sort of thing. Finney Crossing includes restaurants and grocery and things like that, but it seemed like a missed opportunity to have at least something in terms of services for the folks at the north end. Is there, is that something that you're still considering, Andy and Chris?
I think so. We certainly considered it. We have found that commercial one does not necessarily want to be located off of a primary route. And so this particular parcel is set pretty far off of a primary road. And so they are not very interested, based upon communications that I've had at Finney Crossing, about being located off of a primary road. And one of the things that we would say is, yeah, it would be the access to Finney Crossing, to Taft Corners shopping plaza, and Lenny's, and all of those things. Yeah, we're right on that 10-minute line, but if you walked 2 more minutes, you'd be at Maple Tree Place. So I think that was sort of our idea here is, hey, yeah, 10 minutes is to here, but boy, if you walk 12, you'd already be across the Route 2 with access to all these other things. So I guess that would be one thing that I'd say. And I think Andy even brought up the point at one point, might almost be better to show this as a 15-minute walk sheet. And a 15-minute sheet would get you, a whole lot more. So I guess that's the defining factor, is what's reasonable from a walking or connection path. Now, if you're riding a bike, we're talking a
5-minute bike ride gets you to Maple Tree Place easy. Yeah. And I I'm an able-bodied person, so I look at this and I go, yeah, I could walk to pretty much anything from there. And I actually own a home in the hamlet, so I'm used to walking this area. But I try to think about, I know many neighbors who are not as able-bodied, and for them, just getting over to healthy living or something, it's a decent walk for them. So I try to be mindful of that. The other question I had about the land use aspect was, one of the things that I've noticed being the biggest challenge in this kind of northeast quadrant of the growth center, having lived there, is that there's just not a lot of green space to recreate. You kind of have to go over to like Allen Brook to use the rec fields there, or to WCS to have kind of larger areas, or areas with good tree cover and shade for picnics or things like that. And I've heard other neighbors from this area talk about the same thing. So I would just encourage you to consider whether there's opportunities to create space for recreation beyond just walking and biking. That was my only other comment.
Thank you, Reed. Melinda, can you put up the site plan?
You want me to stop sharing, Melinda?
Oh, or I'm sorry, if somebody could put up the site plan, that would be great. The actual site plan with the contour lines and
Let me find it.
right there we go. Oh,
This one?
yeah. So it looks like, okay, so if, boy, it's hard to see, but above the area where you're going to have that area of rocks and trees, if you go straight north, right up to, yep, right there. Right in there. Okay, so there's tree line there. How old are those trees? Like how mature are those trees right in that corner?
I've walked it enough. I'm not sure how mature the trees are. Andy, what along this buffer area here, I'm not sure it's old growth trees. I think it's been more farmed than it has anything else. Andy, is that your memory? I don't.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd want to take a look at that. I know that the trees, once you get into the steeper slope areas and obviously down along Allen Brook, they're much more mature. But I'd want to check that area just to make sure that, as you said, it's not an area because of its slope that was previously farmed. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, maybe over the last 10 or even 15 years, it's been allowed, you know, the forest edge has been allowed to encroach into that area that now that the land's not being, you know, farmed for a living anymore, that's not fairly early growth in that little triangular shaped area.
Okay, yeah, because it looks like if you go east up to the, in that little area where those trees are to the slope, there's a primitive path. And like, can you tell me anything about that primitive path? I know we don't have it on the map, the town map. It goes right in that triangle of trees. It's on the east side and it goes into where the slope is.
Are you talking about in this area here?
Nope. Okay, go back to where we were talking about that little triangle of trees. So right there. There is a primitive path right along the steep part of the slope on the east side.
If you zoom in a little bit more, Chris, there's two very fine double lines that define the primitive paths through that area. And I think those are, you know, it's been a while since I've been down in there, but having walked through that area, both on the Brennan Woods side, behind Forest Run, and with Finney Crossing, there's a number of, you know, just footpaths through the woods that tend to evolve based upon the nearby residents' use of those. You know, I think at times they get more use, at other times they get less use. With the pandemic, they may be getting a lot more use. I know that, so we weren't involved with the Alliance Church permitting, but I think there was some pushback from the state having concerns with formalizing some of those trails in terms of, you know, maintaining or limiting human intrusion into the wildlife blocks that exist along Allen Brook. And if you look at the larger context here, they extend north to Woodlily and Forest Run, across Allen Brook on the north end of Finney Crossing, and also connect over into the back of the old IBM property, which was developed by Jason Adams, and also a little bit of Brennan Woods.
Mhm.
Thanks for highlighting, Chris. I was still trying to find those little double lines.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't, I couldn't find it, but there we go. And then I guess it continues, you know, I mean, I've spent a lot of time at Finney Crossing, and I can't, you know, I don't remember ever really seeing anybody walk. This would be the Finney Crossing property. So this is the property line right here. Sorry for my bad scribble. But I don't remember seeing anybody walk that path. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but
It also looks like maybe it crosses the river. It crosses the Allen Brook right there in that triangle that Laura was talking about.
Yeah, so if you go a little south of that red, the northern part of that red line, if you go south in that little triangle, that I was first talking about, the path goes from that red line south.
Exactly.
It looks
yeah.
like, and I think I've been back there before. I think it is a way that people coming who are walking in the field were getting over to that primitive path.
yeah.
Is my recollection.
Yeah, that's not, the Allen Brook is down here in this area
Yeah.
here. So this is just a steep slope.
Got
Yeah,
it.
it's wet in there, but it's not
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I was,
crossing.
the only reason I mentioned it, I should have gone to look at the property itself, but I just didn't know if this was a place where, as Reed suggested, there could be green space. I have no idea how old the trees are in there, if it's a nice little walking path or if it's more marshy and meadowy to go up to that steep part. But it sounds like you've had conversations about not wanting people to kind of get in there close to the river.
Can I comment on that? I remember when we were approving the church development that I think, at least initially, it was our desire to have a designated primitive path through this area. And I remember we were pushing for it. I honestly don't remember the outcome of that. But at one time it was desirable to have an official primitive path permitted through this area.
we certainly would not be opposed to that. If that was, you know, if there was you know, to utilize and access and show people how to get there.
Yeah, the problem,
that's a positive thing from our perspective.
yeah. So maybe it's worth a little more formal look at it from a couple of us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is one thing that the growth center would benefit from, is more opportunities to feel like you're in nature without going far away from the growth center. And so this is, you know, one of those areas where clearly it's not going to be developed because it's so close to Allen Brook and has some steep slopes, but possibly it could give that feeling of, you know, a walk in the woods just 2 minutes from the homes you're talking about building.
I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris or Andy, but I recall that when Essex Alliance Church was proposing this development, that A&R basically like wanted them to take the primitive trails off the map because they didn't want people going down to the Allen Brook. So when they were trying to get an Act 250 permit. So, you know, I don't know, that may be an issue, but.
Yeah, that may have been the outcome too, what I was remembering.
So I have a question. I lost internet connection, so just let me know if you've already talked about this. So I was wondering how the Allen Brook would be protected, because that is a, you know, corridor, wildlife corridor area, and we're losing it in that area pretty quickly. So I was wondering about having limited access to that area, so to not just have so many people down on the brook disturbing wildlife. And so I don't know what was talked about, but it sounds like there's some steep slopes and those areas should be protected, but maybe Act 250 already did that.
So I think one, we're not proposing this based upon the town's regulations and steep slopes. The proposed neighborhood. Sorry, I keep flipping through here trying to right page, but we have to follow the town's regulations. And Andy, what are the dimensions from the Allen Brook to the back edge, or based upon the steep slopes? What is the corridor dimension again?
Well, the watershed protection buffer applies to everything within 150 feet of the edge of the Allen Brook. So there's very limited activities that are allowed within that. Trails, obviously, the bike path crosses through that now. Utilities, I don't think we would have any utilities short of a stormwater outfall. And then stormwater facilities are allowed in those areas if there's no available upland area, or excuse me, not upland, but area outside the watershed protection buffer that's available. So that 150-foot corridor on both sides, largely the development is only on one side. There are some places where the property extends to the other side of Allen Brook, but that would be left in its natural state.
So I have a question about how that 150-foot area would be protected. And I know in past developments, there's been some issue about some of that's been encroached on, and just simply using a line of trees might not be good enough. This is a large development, so you're going to multiple contractors, multiple truck drivers, and so many people in and out of that property. I'm wondering if something a little bit more substantial, like boulders or posts or things to protect that 150-foot buffer from that area, from the brook.
I certainly can speak to that. I think, yes, we are more than willing to put boulders along that buffer line or 150-foot line. Typically, what we have found, and Melinda may be able to speak to this, is as soon as we'll follow and we won't encroach during our construction period. It's the people after we leave tend to be the ones who encroach within that buffer. We're pretty cognizant of that buffer line. We may have a mishap. I'm not going to lie. We may have one moment in time, but in general, we're pretty good about it. And so what we have found is that boulders are actually the best piece to put there. Trees tend to get mowed around, and then all of a sudden they start mowing further into the field, whereas the boulders seem to work better. And fencing just seems to pen people in, and they're not happy about the fencing. They end up taking it down or doing something to it. So we have found that boulders, and we're more than willing to do that, to identify that as a buffer line. Boulders, or maybe there's a smattering of a little section of fence in an area on the backside of some open areas, but some mixture of some of that product.
We're saying it's homeowners mostly after the fact that are sort of just like expanding a little bit at a time, eating away.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can also speak to that too. So after Creek's Edge was built, there was a lot of confusion even about the boulders, and I was getting calls from the homeowners association asking, can we mow around the boulders? And I told them, no, mow up to the boulders, and that's it, and there just seemed to be a little bit of pushback about the mowing. And also with other developments like Chatham Woods, where you have a fence delineating the boundary of the watershed protection buffer, they even wanted to mow in back of the fence so that they could protect the fence. So there is this big desire to do more and more mowing. One suggestion I did make in the staff report had to do with how close the houses are to that line of trees. Because in my experience, being very close to the forest kind of causes this anxiety about hazard trees. And we've seen with Chatham Woods, they have now cut down 26 trees that were identified as hazard trees. Similarly to Creek's Edge, a couple of hazard trees were cut down, were removed because people were afraid that the trees would fall on their houses. So for that reason, I think it would be wise to have a buffer between the buildings and the forest, at least beyond the striking distance of trees to prevent that type of encroachment.
Why don't we go to the staff report? Unless there's something else that
Can
we
I
need
make
to.
one more comment, Laura, before we
Yeah.
move on to the official findings and recommendations? And that's just that I didn't see anything in here about renewable energy infrastructure related to this development, Chris and Andy, or energy efficiency standards or things like that. Could you just say anything that you have in the plans on those items?
Yep. So in terms of our construction, we have been following the Efficiency Vermont. They changed the terms. It's the current code compliant energy standards, which are set higher than code. So it's code compliant through Efficiency Vermont. So it's like a code plus whatever their requirements are. And so we have been following that in our construction practices. So the homes are very efficient, meet all of those guidelines. In terms of renewables, it is hard to we will design houses so that people can put solar on their houses. But everybody has very different perspectives on what that looks like and how it looks. And so we do design our houses that allow for that, but then we allow them to do it on their own, not through our prescribed path.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I do have one question about the bike path where it crosses over the Allen Brook. Is there an existing bridge there now to
Yes.
connect?
Yes.
Okay, and is that someone's responsibility? The bridge?
So the town has already constructed that. It's already there. And right now it ends as soon as it hits just before Beaudry Lane. It just kind of stops.
Okay, thanks.
Terry, it's a beautiful bridge. And when you're on it, you think you're just going to keep going and then it stops.
The bridge to nowhere.
Yes.
And then I guess I'll just throw out one more quickly. There was a slide there that showed that there was a somewhat of an encroachment on the wetlands, class 2 wetlands with the apartment buildings.
Mhm.
I think it was. And so you said you would be addressing that later, but what would you be moving? You can see where it encroaches into the one apartment building. So would you be decreasing the size of that?
So the Alpine Drive is going to be the area that actually encroaches on the wetlands, and that was previously approved, that impact through the state. And then the buffer would be, as shown on this current slide that Melinda just has here, we would, I guess if we're going to be impacting the wetland, I guess the question is that we would probably maintain that impact of the buffer, but we wouldn't, that building wouldn't be impacting the wetland anymore because Alpine Drive would have already done that.
So is the state going to come back and reassess these wetlands? How long ago was this looked at?
So this was looked at and approved back, it was October of 2020. So this was recent. This is within the last 10 months that this was re-reviewed and reapproved.
including a wetland delineation
So
at that time, or does the wetland delineation go back further?
The wetland delineation was redone in September of 2020 and then reviewed and approved by the state in October.
Mhm.
So the road there goes right through the class 2 wetlands,
That's correct.
and that was approved, huh?
Yes, previously approved under the church property or proposal.
Which that was years ago, right? With the
The current permit is actually is currently approved. It could be constructed now. It's just it's in place. Their permits are in place for the property to be developed. It's just I'm sort of talking about this as a change of use of a previously approved parcel of land.
So Chris, I have a quick question related to that. And that is, now that it's a totally different development, does that necessarily mean that everything was approved in the past? That you have permission to expand that Alpine Lane or whatever it is? Does that necessarily mean that that's automatic, that you automatically get approval for that in this totally different impact that you're imposing here?
So the wetland impacts, it would be based upon square footage of impact, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy. But I think the square footage is what you're allowed to impact, and the location of that would be defined. And so we would maintain that. We would say that that was previously approved and currently in an approval status. But yes, overall, the rest of the neighborhood, we are, showing changes, and we're having to follow, the current guidelines.
I don't think it's necessarily automatic, Gary, but I think the impacts associated with access are maybe a little bit different. The first thing that the state and the Army Corps look at is avoidance and then minimization. In terms of access, the site enjoys good access, but I think 3 access points make sense, given the level of development, given the connectivity to the neighborhoods, and especially given that Alpine Drive was originally envisioned to be the primary access to this property, and was constructed when the bank was built. So while the extension of Alpine Drive would impact the wetland and the wetland buffer in that area, I think given that, it has been minimized in that it's going to cross the wetland. It's not curving to the north in order to increase the impact. It's kind of running straight through at the very tip, so it's not bisecting the wetland into 2 pieces. It is for access. In access, again, was one of those site features or development features that is usually looked at not necessarily favorably, but as sort of a necessary item in order to gain reasonable access to the property. And I think losing access via Alpine Drive would be a major detriment to whatever development happened on this property. Having good access to Route 2A is really important for whatever happens on this property.
So it looks like the road you talked about having curves in the road to slow interior traffic. And it could be that you put a little curve in there to avoid that and maybe center that apartment building. So it would miss that buffer. It looks like it is possible to move that apartment building over closer to the other one and angle.
I guess that's kind of what I was getting at. Is I think we should not ignore the fact that it's impacting a class 2 wetland, and at least have that as a concern in our recommendations.
Is
That's
there
fair.
wiggle room?
We certainly can take a look at it.
Laura, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think that that might be one of the recommendations, if I remember correctly, in the staff report. So maybe
go
we,
there.
yeah, we should look at those.
Okay.
Okay, so, see,
It's recommendation number 6.
yep. Yep, shift the location of the urban park to align with the upland area and to avoid impacts to the wetland buffer, adjust the locations of buildings so that they are entirely outside the watershed protection buffer. So that is in the recommendations. Any further comment on or additions to number 6? About the
I was just gonna
road?
say, I think Terry, you were talking about moving the road to avoid going through the class 2 wetland. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess. And they were talking about putting curbs in the road. Well, that would be a good area to do that, to slow down traffic a little bit and traffic calming and avoid the buffer.
I just wanted to say that as you were saying that, Terry, I was looking at the map that was up and it looks as though the property line goes into the buffer so that the road can't actually avoid completely, but it might be able to skirt closer to the edge of the wetland. I was just going to say that.
Yep. What if we say to the extent that the road can curve to avoid the wetland, that we would like to see that to avoid impacts to the wetland buffer.
And I think we should say wetland and wetland buffer.
Yes.
I think right now it's doing both.
Yep. Okay. Melinda, can you add wetland? Should impacts to the wetland and wetland buffer?
And does that number 6 mention the road? I think it only talked about the buildings.
Right. So we would have to add a line.
Just a note that in our bylaw does allow road crossings across wetlands and buffers.
Mhm.
However, I think it's to minimize the impact as a result of that. So
Right.
any way that it can be shifted south, I guess, or I guess, is that south? Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah. Well,
That to minimize the impact. I mean, I agree with Chris. If the road does go in as planned, or, once the road goes in, there's kind of no point in avoiding a wetland that's south of the road, a wetland buffer that's south of the road, because it's already impacted once the road goes in. So what I'm saying is that there's no point in shifting that building location if the road goes in as planned or minimally impacting it.
mhm.
I think you just do the best you can to minimize impact on the wetland and the wetland buffer by shifting the road as far south as possible, potentially including a curve or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see. We could put it in with the adjust location of buildings. We could say where possible, adjust the location of the road so that they are entirely outside the watershed protection buffer. Or should we not do that because we really need to follow kind of the letter of the law? So we can't say adjust. We can just recommend that if possible, that happens. I guess somebody needs to help me with wording there.
So how about minimize impacts to wetlands and wetland buffers to the degree possible by shifting the locations of the road, the urban park and buildings. I mean, the buildings, as you said, are not really that much of an issue. It's really the road. So
that sounds good to me.
Yep.
looking at that map, I don't quite see how you could do that in terms of shifting the road out of the wetland buffer.
Yeah, I think we're talking about basically, Carl, if the road curved south, just as it's hard without the picture up there, but if it curved south just briefly as it went through that wetland area, it would impact fewer acres of wetland.
Well, if it curves south as it goes through there, it's going to go right through the apartment building.
Right, but these are preliminary sightings for the buildings. Yeah.
So Chris and Andy, I mean, do you guys ever pursue like buying a chunk of that bank land so that you could move the road to the south? Is that type of thing ever viable?
You know, we haven't pursued it. We can ask a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Alpine Drive has already been constructed, boy, pretty far in there. I think it's right about where maybe even further in than when your arrow is. It may almost be to there already.
Yeah, it's almost to the wetland buffer.
Yeah. So I think, you know, we're a little constrained in that sense, but we certainly can have it, you know, we understand the concern. Let us see what we can come up with and see if there's some ideas on how we can address it. You know, I think our goal right now is to get into the growth management queue. We know that there are going to be changes and modifications that are going to happen over the next, I shouldn't say this, over the next 12 months. You know, we're not going to start this construction tomorrow. This is a long haul, and we know that there are going to be modifications and things that are going to come up through the different groups and concerns that are addressed. So I think we're open to it. We understand. I think it's a fair request, especially from the Conservation Commission, to see if there's a way to minimize the impact, and we can go to work at that.
Because
I think
it
the banks,
also looks like the senior housing is touching the buffer and there's a townhouse possibly.
Yeah,
So
right. There's some, you know, and these are pretty wide lines on the buildings, and I'm not sure if that building is, I mean, could we trim that building back by 2 feet and not have an impact? Yeah, maybe. Right now it's a pretty loose in my mind, and we certainly need to address that as we get further along.
All right, thank you. I think we should go back to recommendations. I know we're over time, but this is important. So if we could start with recommendation number 1 and just go through them, because I think we need to let Chris know whether what the recommendations are, so we can move forward. So we're asking for a habitat disturbance assessment by a qualified wildlife biologist as part of the discretionary permit application because of the significant wildlife habitat and corridor that's there. Any comment on that?
Fine.
Sounds good.
Okay, number 2.
Hold on.
Okay, thanks. No development shall occur within the special flood hazard area, and from the plan, there was no development planned. So number 3, the applicant needs to submit a professionally prepared runoff and erosion control plan as part of the discretionary permit application. The development should utilize on-site stormwater infiltration design to the degree possible to reduce impacts to nearby streams. Stormwater management features should be integrated into the landscaping plan. And it sounds like with rain gardens, that is something that is thought about. And Chris, are you planning on a runoff and erosion control plan?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions about number 3? All right. 4, the existing tree line should be used to demarcate the 150-foot watershed protection buffer of the Allen Brook. Signage should be posted along the tree line to inform the public about the buffer and its purpose. Additionally, the dwelling should be located far enough away from the existing tree line so as not to be a target for potential hazard trees, to avoid unnecessary tree removals and impacts to the riparian buffer.
Item on this one, Laura,
Yeah,
was we talked about something more permanent than just the tree lines, such as boulders being used to
yeah,
protect
And-
that edge.
yeah. So I think the existing tree line,
I think number 7 below actually
Okay,
partially that, but
yeah, I think 7 is where,
like you don't necessarily need to have it entirely along the tree line, but
mhm.
where people are likely to encroach or mow.
right.
might- Uh,
And the other thing that's included in number 4 is signage, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah,
And
that's fantastic.
Yeah, when people move in, it'd be great if the first thing they read in their backyard is, please don't go beyond this, and here's why.
Well, yeah, the reason I think it's important too is I've spoken with people from some of these developments, like somebody on Half Moon Lane, for example, who was clearing trees in the buffer. And I noticed that a whole bunch of trees had been cleared in the buffer, and I saw somebody in their backyard, and I asked him, do you know who's been clearing these trees? And he said, oh, I have. They seemed like they were dead, and I thought it would look better if they were all cut down and cleared. And because he simply didn't know what the buffer was or what its purpose was. So for that reason, I think some education should be done. And I would even go so far as to say, like, we should develop a brochure that we can hand out to the homeowners associations or each new homeowner that moves into one of these new developments, they get a brochure explaining about the buffers.
Mhm.
As a neighborhood developer, just so you guys know, they are probably notified at least 3 times about what's in their backyard. And there's written documentation that we actually tell them they have to read prior to moving in. And along with a plan with a red line that shows where that wetland buffer line or whatever line, watershed protection lines, whatever. So they get a lot of information. However, they think they can kind of do whatever they want. And so I think if you had a brochure or something that came from the town that described it, it may create less friction down the road for Melinda to say, she could just hand it out and say, this is why it's important. So I think that there is some benefit to having the town present some sort of, even if it's a 1-page flyer that we can give them, and say, this is why this is here. And we'll give it to them when they first meet us. We'll give it to them when they, if you give it to us, we'll replicate it. We'll create, we'll print it. We'll do whatever we need. But they'll get it. But then if there needed to be an enforcement piece, then Melinda could also say, this is something that you guys should have received too.
Yeah.
I think what Melinda is talking about the individual saying, oh, I just felt like it looked better, is I don't know how to address that piece, and maybe we don't worry about it, but I do feel that it's really salient. When I was working on the Lawn to Lake project, we were trying to convince homeowners to just raise the blade on their lawnmower and mow their grass to 3 inches instead of 1. And the vast majority of homeowners that didn't want to do it was because of aesthetics. They just felt like it looked unkempt. And I think that people really like, if there's some way to address aesthetics in the flyer, like it will actually make a lusher, greener forest in your backyard, something that sort of like appeals to the idea that it's eventually going to look less messy or even look better. I'm sort of astounded by people's like the need to neaten everything, you know?
I agree. Yeah.
And also mentioned, you know, it brings in wildlife, like snags and trees and things like that, that it's actually beneficial.
Yeah, that can also be.
Yes, but I think people would prefer neatness over those ecological benefits, right? When we were doing the, hey, raise the blade on your lawnmower campaign, we were doing all this education about how that extends root growth and then water infiltrates in a different way and it results in cleaner runoff and then a cleaner lake and cleaner streams in your backyard. And none of that, people were sort of like, yeah, but my lawn doesn't look as good as my neighbor's. So I really think that aesthetic part has to get, like any brochure, education or outreach, it has to address this like need to have a neat, tidy property.
All right. Thank you, Kim. I know, I think people are just going to do what they're going to do, no matter how much signage or whatever there is. But so, do we agree that signage is a good idea for number 4?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
it meets them at the point where they might do something bad.
Right, I agree. All right, any more comment on number 4? All right, moving on to number 5. If the previous wetland delineation was done prior to 2016, a new delineation should be conducted by a professional wetland scientist. Chris, it sounds like it was not done prior to 2016.
That's correct. It was done in 2020.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we'll have that study as part of our.
Okay, well, all right.
That one.
Number, pardon?
I'll scratch it. I'll take it out.
Okay,
Not necessary.
Thanks, Melinda.
thank you. 6, shift the location of the urban park to align with the upland area and to avoid impacts to the wetland buffer. Adjust the locations of buildings. We already went through this, sorry. Okay, let's go on to number 7. Unless someone wants Melinda to reread 6.
I guess what I've got is just minimize impacts to the wetland and wetland buffers to the degree possible by shifting the locations of infrastructure such as the urban park and the road and
Okay.
building.
All right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good.
All right, 7, where the class 2 wetland buffer traverses backyards of dwellings, provide a physical demarcation of the buffer. We talked about this, such as boulders, and it sounds like Chris knows kind of what works well. Let's go on to 8, provide a current within the last 5 years functional assessment of the class 3 wetlands on the property. Yeah, I saw those were south. Chris, do you have any information on that?
So the class 3 wetlands are, I think, in the southeast corner of the property, and they're extremely isolated. It's a dip in the meadow area. Probably, it's definitely not even wet, but we certainly can, I think the report by the ecologists who did the work last fall, we can provide that information.
Okay, great.
So
Any
8
other-
stands.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we'll see that in the next round of
Okay.
review.
Okay. 9, feature the Adirondack views where they exist in the design of the urban park. Any comment on this?
Read here. I like that you guys are looking for ways to do some rooftop patio kind of stuff, because there are beautiful views from this area, and it would be a shame for folks to only see it from the ground level if you have structures like this. So I'm interested to see where that goes. But in general, yeah, this is something we haven't focused as much on in other developments. I'm glad to see there's a recommendation in here. I'd like to see it stay.
Is the current limit 36 feet? Is that what the,
It's 36 feet, yeah, so basically it eliminates the fourth floor. So, but we're working, there's a question, I would say there's some gray area in that we're providing structured parking underneath the first floor is actually the structured parking. So the question, when you go to structured parking, it actually allows you to go to 52 feet. And so that's, in our mind, is the garage structured parking component or not? So we're working on that.
And the recommendation, at least my intent in that is not to prevent blocking views. Like all the views don't need to be preserved. Just that if there is an area of the development, like in the urban park, that could feature a really nice Adirondack view, take advantage of that, use that as an asset.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, it would be nice to somehow have those rooftops. That would be fantastic. But anyway, so we've gone through the recommendations. Is there anything else that anyone wants to mention? If not, do I hear a motion to approve these recommendations as amended?
I move we approve as amended.
I'll second.
All right, any further discussion? All right, there has been a motion to approve the recommendations for this development as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? The motion, the recommendations have been approved as recommended. Thank you, Chris and Andy, for your time and explanation on this.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And as we continue to come back, I'm sure we will see and provide you with some more specific data. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Chris and Andy.
All right, we can go on to Mud Pond now. All right, I sent a summary of our walk, and I just to make sure we were all on the same page, because my memory, when you go to write these down, isn't perfect. So we did discuss parking, and Reed, you were saying that the two people you talked to, which I do know their names because they are in the bottom of the.
Okay, you're the last ones that can't joined us. Yeah.
Right. I think Heard, and I can't remember her name, but what did they talk to you about parking?
Just that they were impacted by the existing access and parking. That they especially noted just headlights at night coming out of the parking there, shining into their home was an impact to them, and that they supported continuing to work on parking solutions. And I indicated to them that we would likely be talking about Mud Pond's conservation area plan over the next few meetings, and that they should feel encouraged to attend and participate outside of the walk. So you don't need to capture all that obviously in the minutes, but they were in support of working on parking solutions beyond the existing parking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the park does say it closes at dusk, so there shouldn't be a problem with headlights. But again, people probably are coming out of there a little later.
Yeah, they were unsure whether to, they said sometimes people pull in, at night just for a few minutes. I don't know if it's because they're pulling off to text or whatever, but they said that people were pulling into the parking and pulling out of the parking at night and shining headlights in their house. So, they're not they weren't seriously frustrated about it, but they did say at times they didn't know what to do if they saw people parked there and it was, after dusk. What should they be doing? Do they call the police? Do they just mention it to the town? Do they, what do they do about that? Because it was impacting them, and they didn't know, whether folks were doing nefarious activity or whether they were just stopping to send a text message, right? So,
Yeah.
That's, well, there's not much connection right there, depending on your service.
right,
but
yeah. Good luck sending the text.
it's like a dead zone, but
Dean, I have told Mr. Simon, who, as you know, has been, impacted by the parking for years now, that if he sees people parked after dark or making a lot of noise, to call the police. And the police have come out there before. So I don't know, there's something to be said for just that as a deterrent.
Yeah. And it also provides a way to track nuisance.
Yeah.
If it's not reported, then we don't know about it and we can't judge whether it's getting worse or better or whatever. So it's good to have it reported in some fashion.
Mhm.
so just a couple of comments about parking. There must be a reason for it, but to have the few parking spots up near the trailhead and then huge section of area that's no parking, and then people have to park all the way down to the end in this designated area. It just seems odd. I'm sure there's reason, but I just thought maybe if some of the parking could be spread out. Like, my one thing is bikers. I live right up the road from Mud Pond and on South Road. And when you come around the corner, it is a corner. It's blind, and then you come to Mud Pond, and then there's that little straightaway. And everyone that goes biking at Mud Pond Country Park has to park over there and then ride their bike, because they can't ride it on the trails. They ride it along the road. And a lot of times these folks have dogs, because they want their dog to go with them on their ride. And then they have to cross the road. And, I think the speed limit there is 35 or somewhere like 40. Just is really hard. It's sometimes unexpected. So if there was a parking area on the other side of the road, I'm sure there's issues for the bikers where they could park there and not have to be crossing the road. That would alleviate some of the pressure on that parking lot area in Mud Pond. And then also down further where the trail goes down on the Vast Trail, to have a parking area there, because that's, if you park at Mud Pond and then you want to walk all the way out to the other viewpoint, that's a long walk for some people. And if we could spread the parking out to maybe another smaller parking area there, people could park there and access that other boardwalk, which goes out to the second view area.
So Terry, I can provide a little bit of background on the whole parking issue, and I'm not going to take up a lot of time here, only that the Conservation Commission and staff explored different parking options along South Road, just as you've mentioned, for years. And, there are just insurmountable obstacles to doing that, primarily related to environmental constraints. There's a lot of wetlands along the side of the road. And so that's the reason why those options haven't been pursued further. It's just we've determined that it's not feasible to develop another parking lot off of South Road.
Right there near Cyples and where the Vast Trail goes through, that's a wetland area.
There are a number of constraints. And the Cyple property has a conservation easement on it that won't allow any kind of development of a parking lot. So that's, that's kind of what's going on there, not to mention the potential wetlands in that area as well. So just to let you know that those options were thoroughly explored for several years before determining that they were not feasible.
Melinda and I presented all of the work that the Conservation Commission did on this to the select board because they sort of felt like there must be a way to figure this out. And we went through all of the work that we did and the outcome. And I bet there's like a public access if you wanted like the long in-depth version of what Melinda just said.
So would there be a possibility of maybe just kind of a pull-off like there? I know we're talking about the other end, the west side, is a west side of Mud Pond Trail where there's just, which yes, it is dangerous, but is there a possibility of putting like maybe a pull-off for 3 or 4 cars?
Well, because that wouldn't meet the town's regulations and standards for parking. It would have to be located at least 50 feet off the road.
Okay.
So I have to follow our own rules in that respect.
Okay.
I think that there is the potential, and we talked about this at the select board meeting, to alleviate the pressure of mountain bike parking by doing something similar to what Richmond is doing for Cochrane's mountain bike area now. So essentially they are having issues with people parking at the round church and then riding to the Cochrane trails. I don't totally know why people weren't parking in the Cochrane lot because there's a lot of parking there. But the round church, you know, like they wanted the parking for the people that are members of the round church. And volunteer lot gets full really quick. And so they just, you know, they have these other municipal lots in town that were underutilized, and they basically just did like this huge push among the mountain biking community. They did improve the lots, but then they did a huge push among the mountain biking community to just encourage people to park at those existing municipal lots and then ride just a little bit further. And one thing that we did talk about, we have talked about previously, and I think it came up at that select board meeting that I referenced, was there's parking at town hall, right? It's, if you're biking at Mud Pond with kids, this is an entirely different thing, but it's totally reasonable for people to park in the village and then just go on the overpass and over and down South Road to Mud Pond. I ride my bike from my house when I ride there. If you're going mountain biking, it's like but a couple extra miles on the road. There's definitely going to be some people who don't ride on the road a lot and feel really uncomfortable with that corner on South Road and how fast people travel, but it is worth like a push because there's a percentage of mountain bikers that are also road cyclists or gravel cyclists, and it won't be any big thing to them to do that extra distance.
How about that, when they relocated East Hill Road, instead of just kind of going off at it, you know, straight onto South Road, they put a curve in there, and there's I know Cycles uses that as you know, for their farm equipment and things, but it's paved. And is that still owned by the town?
I don't mean, do you mean, sorry, are you talking about, one of my children cut their finger. Are you talking about like putting a parking lot on East Hill Road, or do you mean like are you connecting to what I just said? Because if I'm talking about having people ride from downtown Williston, then they wouldn't go on East Hill at all.
Ellie, I have the same
This is
band-aid.
actually, it probably was an access from South Road. So I don't think there's any spot to access that little point from East Hill Road, but it was where East Hill Road used to be before they moved it. So people just couldn't kind of veer out onto South Road. Now they actually have to go around a corner and stop. So I don't know if that's still owned by the town. Melinda, you might know. Or did it revert back to the Cycles?
I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm gonna bring up Google Earth so we can look at it, because I don't.
So there's an area where they have silo bunkers. So it's on the corner of East Hill Road and South Road.
I think that's the original spot that we were thinking of for a lot, which didn't work. Is that correct, Melinda?
I'm bringing it up. Bringing it up
Do
here.
folks remember how East Hill Road just kind of flowed onto South Road and people were not stopping, I guess is what the problem was? people would just go from East Hill Road and go right onto South Road without stopping and heading to town. And the town just, I don't know.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They must have and just told disciples that we're taking your land and we're going to reroute the road. But and they put a bunch of trees there that kind of eventually died. But there's
Here,
still,
let me show it. Okay, hold on.
but that was just one thought. That's another little spot for people that ride that far from town.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that the town owns this or whether it reverted to Cycles. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, that triangle basically there.
Yeah, that was the road. And
Right.
they just made that bend. If you zoom out, they made that sharp bend to force people, basically, is what was, I think, the intent of that.
I think Cycles definitely park stuff there.
They do, but I don't know if they own it.
Mhm.
And it's
well-
a potential spot for people.
Yeah, I think we can just explore that. That's a good idea, Terry. So let's leave that because we don't know. And we're a little bit behind time. And so if, Melinda, is that something that you could find out about that corner?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go back to the other items that we had talked about at Mud Pond to fill Linda in, or Melinda in. Let's see.
You want me to, I can share that screen again.
If you could share it again, because yeah, they'll jog my memory.
Okay.
Let's see.
This one.
Well, Melinda's bringing that up. I just wanted to mention that the idea that I had for putting bark chips or mulch on the trail were just in the spots where the roots were really exposed, because I don't know if it's just since COVID that they got so worn down, but they're really several spots where there's just, the roots are so exposed. So I don't know if that would be a viable, maybe a Boy Scout project or, a volunteer project to just fill in some of those areas with wood chips. I've seen it on other trails.
All right, thank you. All right, Melinda, make sure that is in the minutes and we'll keep that in mind. Okay, so we looked at the white ash tree that in the future may cause a problem because it's in the parking lot. Melinda and I both looked at that tree, and there was talk about it when we were walking to treat the ash rather than take it down. I did take a DBH of it. It's over 55 inches. So I don't know what that actually means.
It's over 55 inches in DBH or in circumference.
Sorry, you're right. Not diameter, circumference.
Yeah,
Not
I was
the-
like, no way.
Yeah, I know. If that was true, we'd treat it.
So I'll just register my, I'm gonna have to go because I can hear my children destroying my house. They're at their limit of me not paying attention to them, but I'll just register my broad feeling about treatment versus removal in general. And it pertains to this tree, but all other trees. And I think Gary is here too. So maybe he can, either agree or disagree with me. But if the tree is not infested, and even if it's just mildly infested, I don't think there's any great reason to take out ash trees because they might eventually die. Taking them out is not limiting the spread of EAB. We have no evidence that happens. there's no limiting the spread of EAB. If somebody is like bringing it into the parking lot, there's no situation where like the EAB is getting from the person's car or their person to the tree and then the forest, but not directly from the car to the forest, right? Like the removal, there have been like a lot of towns that have tried to do this where they've like cut and chipped swaths of ash trees to try to limit the spread, and it doesn't work. There's no evidence that it works. So cutting down an ash tree because it might get infected with EAB is sort of like cutting off your arm because you might get a cut. It's cheaper to treat than remove. And so from my perspective, and also there are some ash trees that are resistant. And so when you just cut a tree down, you have the possibility that you're limiting the genetic pool further and removing a phenotype or genotype that is resistant to this pest. There's a lot of science happening that's speeding up around long-term solutions. And so unless the only scenario in which it would eventually cost more to treat the tree than remove is if we treated it for like 12 years and nothing and no other solution was developed. And at that point, the cost of treatment would outweigh the cost of removal. But I really believe that the science is gonna figure something out, or there's gonna be some other pest that predates.
I'm pretty sure
EAB.
my twister's almost out of batteries.
I'm pretty sure that I will help you, and just give me 5 more minutes. So anyway, that's my big spiel, that like the scorched earth, remove all the ash trees because we're afraid they're gonna die, so kill them first. I just don't think that it makes good sense, and it's not in line with the best available science. And there's not, I don't know, I don't have that many colleagues that I can't think of actually any colleagues I have that disagree with that perspective. So I also don't think it's like the prevailing advice.
Thank you,
That's
Kim.
my
Yeah,
2 cents.
yeah, it's definitely was not about the spread of EAB. It's just about safety if the tree starts to decline. Maybe since we're late, we can take this issue up at another meeting and decide what to do about that ash tree and maybe ash trees in general that are on.
Can I just ask Gary, like, can you just be like thumbs up, thumbs down? Oh, I think you're muted, Gary.
We see the lips, but we don't hear the sound.
Yeah, he's not
Thumbs up,
muted, but
thumbs
there's
down.
something going on there.
I wanted like someone to second me or be like, no, Kim, you're out of date.
So Kim, actually, we did get a quote for removing that tree, and only because it does seem like it's a safety issue, because once the trees get infected, then they get really brittle and then they're really dangerous. But the quote was like $300. I mean, it was really cheap to like remove that one tree. I mean, not that I'm advocating, necessarily, but just when considering options
Yeah, that's surprising to me that the removal was that cheap. I will say that I still think one-time treatment, which would last for like 2 years, would be cheaper than that, because I think that, I don't know, somebody divide, what did Laura say, 55 by 3.14 times 10 is probably going to be less than 300.
So can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. I hope it doesn't die again. So I guess personally, I think we shouldn't do anything to it right now. I mean, there's no emerald ash borer around there. I mean, and it, in my opinion, is more of a forest tree than it is an urban aesthetic tree. I guess I agree. The only thing I don't agree with, Kim, that I haven't heard, maybe you've heard something I haven't heard, but I'm not sure there's any proven resistance yet that I've heard of in a scientific study that showed individuals being resistant. I think there's some that are maybe more isolated that don't get impacted as soon, but.
I thought that Kimberly Wallen had a paper about like some not,
Yeah.
but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
Or-
until you prove that that's genetic resistance and not just some weird
That's-
phenotypic resistance, then that's a tough thing.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. It may not be proven genetic resistance, but you're still you're still limiting the gene pool.
Yeah,
I would
that's-
accept, I think that I would go along with Gary's suggestion that it just be left. If it was infected at some point, then the discussion around treatment versus removal could happen, right? Like you can treat up to what, 30% crown dieback successfully?
I think there's probably, in my opinion, there's probably dozens more trees in town that are far more important as big viable, urban trees that should be treated before that one. Maybe I'm wrong. I know the town's.
Mhm.
Or even if that tree wasn't worth treatment, it could be left, and then if it became infected, removed. I guess the thing that I'm having a hard time with is just in general in how towns are approaching EAB is like the cutting down of healthy trees, like the cutting off of the arm because they might get a cut, right?
I totally
Like-
agree with you.
Like leave it until, and then if there is damage at some point, then we can address it. It may never be infected.
All
I
right.
don't, that's my 2 cents. I think that I have to go.
Yeah.
There's like serious screaming happening. I might be back, but I'm gonna mute and stop my video.
Thanks,
Thank
Kim.
you, Kim.
We actually use a fellow from Milton, Chris Dulmer, and he's been very reasonable price-wise for treating ash trees. So that might be, if the town thinks about treating it, that might be a good resource.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're behind time, so I am just going to go through the rest of these and just to kind of fill Melinda in. So Melinda, one thing is, there was one tree that was across the path, and when Terry has walks there, some of the people have a hard time getting over that. And I was just wondering who's responsible for taking, that swath out of across the path.
Well, we usually hire somebody to take trees out.
Okay,
I was gonna
Okay.
say Terry with a very large chainsaw.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
if a
okay.
volunteer wants to come along and take it out, they're more than welcome to.
okay,
Okay, we could go there with a chainsaw and just, it's laying down, it's not standing up.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just have to sign a volunteer form before you do that.
I've signed one in the past. Do I have to do it again?
I don't know.
I think I still have your form.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. There's a loop that goes out from the viewing stand that's short, but the adjacent or the neighbors that are in that area love that little loop. They love how the sun comes through the hemlocks there, and it's not on the map. And I was wondering, is that a legitimate loop that we keep up? There was an arrow on one of the trees to show which way to go.
I think it's my understanding, it's an old trail. It's not really maintained. We tend to try to discourage people from taking it because, it's just more impact down there. But yeah, I do know that I have seen trail markers on it, and I know that some people walk it.
Yeah, I think people love it. Let's also save that for another discussion then, if that's okay. What to do about that loop. Gary and Terry mentioned that it would be worthwhile having Ethan take a walk sometime at Mud Pond with the Conservation Commission. We can schedule that at some point. We visited the large red oak, and it is big. And Gary mentioned that he could take a core to see how old it is. Is that correct, Gary?
Yeah, I could probably collect a core out of that.
All right, that could be interesting if it's.
We need to, if it is, it probably is pretty old. We need to even put a little sign nearby, near the trail, say, interesting point that this oak tree is whatever number of years old.
Is that do you see that as an opportunity, Melinda, to to do education, it's visible from the existing trail. So obviously we don't want to encourage people there to like go off the trail and go hugging a giant tree. That's going to be disruptive. But if we could get people to notice it and appreciate it and understand it's what it says about the history of the property and stuff, that might be cool.
Mhm.
Yeah. I just had a question about that note about Ethan. And that's that, I guess my understanding from our last discussion and what I was asked to put in the draft management plan is that the WCC really wanted to have like a hands-off approach when it comes to, like, really didn't want to do any forest management, any active forest management in the conservation area. So I'm wondering why you would want to bring Ethan, bring him into this if you're not really gonna consider any active forest management.
I agree with you, Melinda. I can't remember why we suggested that. Something came up that I thought, and maybe Terry too, thought that his expertise
was
would
it maybe
help
the
us.
invasives? How
Oh,
to
yeah, that
address the
could be.
invasives without
Yeah.
actively managing the natives?
I think it was some of the invasives,
Yeah, well, I take my test tomorrow to become a certified applicator, so I'll be able to tell you that.
There you go.
All right.
All right. Okay, so we do have a item where we did notice some of the invasives, and we should figure out, I mean, it is like a wave. There are invasives everywhere. You have to kind of, pick your battles. But we can talk about that in the future.
Can we just add to that bullet, Laura, that I would like to see the area at the pond, the viewing area, prioritized, because the invasives there are not just ecologically poor, but they're also impacting enjoyment of viewing the pond.
That is a great suggestion. Yeah, we have a lot of areas like that. Like I know Gary had talked about going up to the top of Five Tree Hill also and cutting down some of those for the view. So I think that is something we should take note of, that there are areas like this. And I will put that note.
Yeah, trying to get rid of buckthorn throughout is not going to happen, but
right.
We could probably make it more enjoyable without doing that.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay.
I think I just wanted to mention, I think part of the thing for Ethan I was thinking about was just talking about the benefits of doing a hands-off and how the forest would benefit. And he's been working on this thing with carbon sequestration and joining a group of pieces of land together to create one, carbon offset type thing. So I think that might have been part of what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That can be a conversation with him too. We'll be, I don't know if he necessarily needs to come to Mud Pond for that. Do you think, Terry? So that's just something we could chat with him about.
He has a presentation. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. And for the management plan, I suggested adding language that states that in the section that says no cutting of trees will occur, to make an exception for cultural use of trees such as black ash. And people were on board with that.
Should it also mention invasive, an exception for invasive management?
Yeah, I think it might already. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I wanted to mention when in the bullet of pub that talking about getting a group of folks together, Friends of Williston Trail Parks, maybe in addition to not sustainable, master naturalists, because that's kind of I don't know, it's kind of waning off. I don't see a whole lot of folks doing continuing on with that, but maybe there's some other folks in town that would be interested in joining, because it's a lot. I'm one of the Adopt a Trail folks, and it's a lot to go out 4 times a year and do all that maintenance. So maybe kind of spread it out to a group and maybe have a work day like Laura's having at Catamount.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, with COVID, it's definitely difficult, but we should think about that after, maybe for next Not this fall because things are still kind of iffy, but next year. All right. Any more comments about this? I know that we're running late and we have 5 more minutes. I actually think we should go right on to the staff report.
I'm good to move on. Thanks for documenting.
Same.
Okay. I guess really, the most important thing is, I wanted to bring to your attention that we're renewing the VAST agreement, use of plans, and I have it up here. It hasn't changed since last year, and if anybody has any comments about this agreement.
Have there been any complaints about the VAST, the current VAST usage, Melinda, to the town?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
And have you had any, have you had any concerns about stuff you've seen around the VAST trails?
Nope.
Okay, that's all I care about. If you feel like it's working pretty well, I remember reading it the last time. It seems like it's a relationship that's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, people can change, new people can come in, but the group, the Williston Hillhawks, they talk to Melinda about anything that could be a problem, like when the beavers are, about to flood out the bridge where the VAST trail is or whatever. And they actually do a lot of work clearing the trails that they share with the town trail. So
Yeah, like 5 Tree Hill and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're out, and at Mud Pond. So they're out every fall, just making sure that the invasives are back from the trail. And so right now they're a good group of people.
The only thing I want to mention, Melinda, is in situations like we had this past winter with some rogue snowmobiling on the Lion parcel behind the town hall, perhaps they are a resource that we can refer people to, VAST or the Williston Hillhawks, and say, there are a lot of great places to go if you're not already connected. This is where you should be looking to snowmobile.
Yeah, I think that incident was so specific.
It was so isolated, yeah.
And I'm sure they're aware of, anybody with a snowmobile is probably most certainly going to be aware of the VAST trails, but this person specifically wanted to snowmobile on a place that was very accessible to their.
Yeah, it just makes me think of what Kim's talked about in the past about how if you engage like the mountain biking community they don't want people doing poor behaviors because it ends up impacting everyone. And so I know that other snowmobilers would want good usage of town land.
Yeah, they do. And they often know, whenever they've heard about rogue snowmobilers, they kind of know who it is too, because they know where people live and who has snowmobiles. And they talk to those people. So
nothing to change in the agreement here. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So do we need to approve this, Melinda, or just it's what it is?
If you just want to give a verbal head nod, that would be awesome. Then I can pass it on to the select board. You don't need to formally approve it or anything.
Okay.
Like
So
that.
yeah, especially if it hasn't changed, it looks good to me. Everyone else?
I'm giving thumbs up.
Same here.
Looks good.
All right. All right.
So the other thing I just wanted to bring up was that I worked with some UVM students on trying to quantify trail usage. And I think they had fun with their project. They did some trail use surveys, and they found that they weren't really able to do much with Strava data, but they found that, let's see, they did some, their manual surveys were actually not that far off, in terms of like being consistent with at specific areas. And, you see that gives you an annual estimate. So the annual estimate for the conservation area and the country park are sort of similar and vastly different than that for Five Tree Hill and Suckerbrook Hollow. Suckerbrook Hollow looks like it gets the most use, which I kind of expected. So it was nice to see that the numbers from the trail surveys kind of align with the anecdotal evidence that we have of trail usage. And it's something I would like to increase the manual surveys. I know Anne has done a bunch of them, so I would like to pull those into this calculation and see what we get. What was interesting is the Strava data show a marked increase from 2019 to 2020 at Suckerbrook.
Not a surprise.
Which was when COVID kind of took off, as well as at the Mud Pond Conservation Area. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see. But I would like to kind of continue to work with future classes to refine this and see if, maybe by using trail counters for calibration, if we can potentially do something with Strava Metro data that's more meaningful, or continue to work with the manual surveys. And I know that you had talked about actually conducting a survey, asking questions of trail users. So I think that would be something that maybe we should do with maybe this fall's class, have them actually develop and conduct an online survey or a survey at the trailheads or something like that. Anyway.
I just want to encourage the students. I don't know if you can pass this along, but to think about like writing this up in a really accessible way. Like there are some undergraduate journals, because the like comparison of like, oh, what did Strava produce versus what did this method produce? People are really looking at that, and it would be super cool to have them contribute to that conversation. I think that they're just, this is just as legitimate as, any faculty trying to figure it out. It's another sort of piece in the puzzle as we think about like, oh, what do these new technologies lend in terms of like understanding usage? I don't know if they really have the time or desire to do that, but I just want to validate that it's cool if they wanted to.
Okay. Yeah.
What part of the population uses Strava? I just have really never heard of it. And
I think that's like a big question, right? Is it's this like growing thing. It's really popular among people that are recreating for like fitness or training purposes. So I would say like the vast majority of like competitive cyclists are using it. I think it's true in the running community.
Yeah, trail running
too. It really grew a ton during COVID, because the way that it works is that in addition to it tracking, where you can create segments, and then it like keeps track of like the fastest people on the segment. So during COVID, when there was no racing, all of these Strava challenges emerged, and there were all of these like attempts to set fastest known times on, or like get King of the Mountain or Queen of the Mountain on different really difficult segments. And so it sort of blew up. But within like the research community, there's this big question, which is what you just articulated, like what slice of the user group is that? And if we can understand the answer to that question, does that help us then have better information about making management decisions? And that's what I'm saying, like that. I'm sorry, Eleanor is yelling at me. That question is unanswered, and like even small projects like this are like a piece in the puzzle to figuring out the answer.
Thank you, Kim. All right. Well, we're a little bit over time. Melinda, can we save the annual report for next time? And I encourage anyone who still needs to write up their pieces to do that for the annual report.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Carl has had his hand up and he's sent around his
Oh,
financials.
sorry, Carl.
Just one piece of information I'd like to bring to the commission's attention. I noticed in the paper last week that there's been a change in ownership of the Griswold property on River Cove Road that we've been so interested in over the years. Sarah Kelly bought 288 acres with farm buildings from Shelburne Shipyard for $900,000. I'm not sure who Sarah Kelly is. I think she may be the person who now owns the Griswold homestead. And she may be a daughter of the Griswolds. I don't know. Melinda, do you know who she is and what she plans to do with that property?
I believe I think I've met her because they, Sarah Kelly and some of the other neighbors came in, I don't know, I want to say it was a couple of years ago with a boundary line adjustment so that they could protect like 5 acres that was adjacent to the land. Yeah. So I have met her before.
So it might be that she's the one that has kind of owned it or used it all the time since the couple died.
Yeah.
But anyway, just wanted you to be aware that there has been an official change in ownership.
It's good information.
Did that go up for sale, Carl, and we just didn't have the money, or was it like a private thing, do you think?
I just noticed it in the Observer under real estate transactions. Probably, that if she is part of the family, I think that was just.
I did have a question for you, Carl, about the ERF really quickly, if there's time for it.
Sure.
I know the answer is no, Laura. The very last line of the ERF document mentioned the balance for June 30th, 2021. There were 2 numbers. I couldn't tell which number was the current balance.
One of which seems very high, correct?
Yeah, the 273,646 versus the 194,834. I'm guessing it's the 194.
194 is the total interest that's earned over the years.
Oh,
273,646.
You're quite far away from the microphone, Carl, but I think you just said the 273,646 is the accurate current balance.
The balance.
Okay, well, that's better.
That's great.
Better than last year, that's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Is there anything else before we close? Okay, thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.